"They took my teacher," she said, "and I do not know where they put him." After she said this, she turned away and saw Jesus standing there, but she didn't recognize him. Jesus spoke to her, "Woman, why do you weep? Who are you looking for?" She, thinking he was the gardener, said, "Mister, if you took him, tell me where you put him so I can care for him." Jesus said, "Mary." Turning to face him, she said in Hebrew, "Rabboni," meaning teacher. Jesus said, "Don't cling to me, for I have not yet ascended. Go to my brothers and tell them, I ascend to my God and your God." Mary Magdalene went, telling the news to the disciples. "I saw the teacher." And she told them everything he said to her. This is the gospel of Christ.
Praise to Christ, Lord.
Hi, everyone. I don't often get very joyful before I do a service. I'm usually pretty nervous, thinking, am I going to say the right thing? Am I well prepared? And is the bulletin going to be ready? But today I woke up with a lot of joy and happiness, and I think Mary Magdalene must have something to do with it. Because you know, as you all know who know me, I love this topic and this subject. But I think that it's very special that we are in a church where the pastor here allowed and encouraged us to read from the Apocrypha, the Gospel of Mary Magdalene, the Gospel written about her, and to show some major points that I think are now coming to light that I think are very helpful to us 2,000 years later. I think it's very helpful to our culture, very helpful to us as individual people, perhaps to every country in the world, for this to be coming to light. And I think it has tremendous ramifications. The fact of what we've read today has tremendous implications and ramifications. It could change the world if it was embraced as the truth. And I'm all for that. I think we could use a little change. And I think the change is going to come through the female aspect of humanity. I think the male aspect, which has been a little bit too much in charge and out of balance, has to step aside a little bit and let the female aspect, however that comes through, come through. And so what do I mean and what am I saying? I first want to say that before he comes up here, that Dr. Pekauskas, who we call Ray here, was instrumental in, you know, I want to call him Dr. Pekauskas for the sermon, because he is a doctor, and he is Dr. Pekauskas, and he is an authority. So, but he was instrumental in having me really understand a lot of the Gospel of Mary Magdalene that we present here today. He was instrumental in really having me understand the theology behind it that we're going to share with you. 3 or 4 brief points for your discussion. We'd like to make the points and have you ask any questions. So feel free to do that as we go. The first point is leadership, and this is in its own, as we talk in here and we talk about, I want you to know what this flies in the face of, so that you have an idea of what this is really saying. The leadership principle, the fact that she was considered a leader and an apostle, and the favorite one and the most knowledgeable one, which is what this gospel reveals. And you know, that was pretty much known. I mean, that's been pretty much proven by biblical scholarship that was sort of hidden. But with the archaeology and the biblical scholarship that's available, we kind of know that women were in positions of spiritual leadership in the early church, that Jesus ministered to women equally to men, that he had women apostles and women disciples, and that women often were the ones who arranged his schedule, got him from town to town, made sure he had food and a place to stay, used their own money, women of considerable wealth and power. But Mary Magdalene is a leader in this gospel. She's given spiritual authority over the male apostles in the room. What this is so important, and why this is, I think, so important in many ways between the church, the organization, politically, in every way you can imagine, is that this basically, and Ray, correct me if I get any of these words wrong because it's important the way this is said. This establishes spiritual leadership as the criteria for being an apostle of Jesus, and not apostolic succession from Peter. This breaks the mold and says, you do not have to be in apostolic succession from Peter to be an apostle of Jesus. That's heavy duty. People have been killed for saying that. So, but here it is in the Apocrypha, and this is from about 200 AD, 150 AD, 160, 170 AD. This is not a document. This document was not discovered until 1896, I think it was, or 56, 1896. It just became available, and it was also in the Nag Hammadi documents. There it was, and as you'll read, if you read the whole thing, you'll see that it's in fragments. The whole thing doesn't exist anywhere yet that they found. But the versions they found are from the same exact time that the most of the books in the Bible were also put into the Bible that we know. So this isn't like this was written in 1500 by somebody and stuck in now in the year 2012. This was written back in the time, and it was written about Mary Magdalene, not by her, but about Mary Magdalene and what she was given. So that's the first mind blower right there, is apostolic succession, which is a huge deal in both the Greek Orthodox Church and the Roman Orthodox Church, and the Anglican community is basically said you can step forward and be ordained as a spiritual leader just based on your relationship with Jesus the Christ as your Savior. If you have the calling, you can do it. And I think there's a lot of sects of Christianity that have actually said that, that anybody is called to be a minister who stands up and says, and the Baptists do that, don't they? Where they just stand up and say, I've been called and I'm ready to go. But this is an amazing change. This is just one. I'd also like to note, thanks to Dr. Bukowskis, that even Paul says that there were women apostles. If you read Paul, he says there were women apostles. One of the big ones was Junia, right? Junia, which he says in Christ before me. Right. She was a prominent apostle who was in Christ before me. It doesn't say a prominent disciple, a prominent apostle, who was meaning got it before I got it. She was there doing it before I was doing it. And he pays homage to her. There are two other women, Lydia and Nympha, who are also referred to as prominent apostles in the Bible. In our regular Bible here, you can find it in the New Testament. This isn't from the Apocrypha, this is from the actual New Testament. The other thing I wanted to say is that this is very important. And Ray, why don't you come up, since I got a lot of what we're talking about today, I really got as a result of him. That's why I asked him to be Bible here. You can find it in the New Testament. This isn't from the Apocrypha, this is from the actual New Testament. The other thing I wanted to say is that this is very important. And Ray, why don't you come up, since I got a lot of what we're talking about today, I really got as a result of him. That's why I asked him to be here. He said he would sort of back me up and answer the questions, but I also want him to stand up and speak, and please feel free to ask questions. In chapter 14, which Paul is it? Corinthians. It says that women shouldn't speak in church, right? It says that. Now, that's been used for centuries. And its biblical scholarship now says that that was an insert. That was inserted. Paul did not say that. There's no evidence that he would have written that or said that. And he contradicts that in chapter 11, which they believe he did say. So where he says the women are...
And in 11, he's reprimanding one of the women for not having her head covered. in church. He's saying when you prophesy, the assumption being, well, if you're prophesying, that's something that's okay. And Paul himself is bluntly stating that that's fine, but it will cover your head. That's a ritual aspect of it. And in 14, he suddenly says, if you need to know anything, go ask your husband at home. Don't speak in church. It is shameful for a woman to speak in church. That sounds more like whoever wrote Timothy than it does like Paul.
So we have to challenge our thinking. I'm not trying to say today that you should believe what I say, but I do want to challenge all of our thinking to think that this such damaging material that's in here may not even, it may have been inserted for some reason, and maybe at the time a wonderful reason. Who knows? I don't even want to say that the people who inserted it were horrible people or whatever they did. They did it for whatever reason they did it. But we only have this. All we have now is what we have, our evidence.
I'm just curious, how do we know, how do we know when something's being inserted? Is there some discontinuity of style or something?
When something has been inserted.
You look at two things. You look at, when you see, how does it fit with the verse that went before and the verse that went after? It doesn't fit that well. Second, you look at the Greek structure. Does it sound like Paul, the way he constructs things? It didn't sound that much. That's not that much difference. The Greek looks very much like it belongs. But the main thing is, in the very same, he could very well contradict what he says elsewhere. But to say in the very same epistle, from chapter 11 to chapter 14, to contradict himself, that would not go. Especially since Paul's method, he didn't usually write. He dictated to a scribe. And the scribe would have picked that right up and said, hey, wait a minute, you said no. What's this? So that would never have gotten. When you look at the way it doesn't fit, and then you look, you see this elsewhere, and yes, you see this in Timothy, for example. And Timothy was not written by Paul. The Greek totally different in style. So that's the usual way. You look within the text, and then you look, compare it with the rest of the Pauline corpus, the rest of these writings either attributed to Paul or associated with him.
They've got this down amazingly if you're into biblical scholarship. Ray showed me a book where they have the entire sayings of Jesus, and they have four color codings. One is we think he absolutely said this. Two, we think we're in doubt as to he might have said it, he might not have said it. Three, what is it? Maybe he said this. And four is no way. And they do the entire, every word that is uttered in the New Testament, and then they give all the reasons, all the scholar, and it's fascinating. What it has done for me in this year has really had me take a look at these writings, which, you know, they say the Bible contains the truth, but maybe not the facts. You know, that's how it's defended, and that is true. I mean, it's an extraordinary piece of writing. It's an extraordinary group of stories, but it does deserve scrutiny. Everything about God deserves scrutiny. You know, everything about us deserves scrutiny if you want to live an examined life. So I say something that I've thought since I was 3 years old is okay. No, it's not okay if it doesn't serve me anymore. And that's what we're basically doing with these scriptures. And it's extraordinary. These people are such scholars that they can pick out inserted things. I'm reading a book called Misquoting Jesus right now. You have that, you know, that book? And it's such an extraordinary book because they can just give such brilliant understanding and explanation for the simplest misunderstanding. And the one that Rusty says, always, that's the one that if anybody questions me, I always say this. And that is, did John the Baptist eat locusts or the fruit of a locust tree? You know, it was translated as locusts. And when you go back to it, it's the fruit of the locust tree. And if you know the area, there were plenty of local locust trees in that area at the time where you could easily pick the fruit. And there were no locusts. So, but yet it says in 99 out of 100 Bibles that he ate locusts, and who doesn't believe, the average person doesn't believe that John the Baptist ate locusts and wore bearskins or something, you know. And that might have been true, but the locust part, they pretty much determined that it was the fruit of the locust tree. Yes?
I think in one of the part of the reading, Peter says to Mary, "We know that the Savior loved you more than the rest of women. Tell us the words of the Savior which you remember, which you know, but we do not. Nor have we heard them." And then when she speaks, he says, what does he say? He says, Peter answered and spoke concerning the same things. He questioned them about the Savior. Did he really speak privately with a woman and not openly to us? Are we to turn about and all listen to her? Did he prefer her to us? Now, in one place he's saying one thing. Once she starts to talk, he's backing off that. I think that's kind of interesting.
It is, and there's a lot to be said. That's why I wanted to read it, because of course the scholarship on this particular book is enormous. Around it's filled. The part of Mary Magdalene's gospel that's difficult is the mystical part. There's a lot of mystery, and basically that's why they become confused. She starts talking about the 7 layers and the descending and ascending and overcoming the 3rd power and the 7 powers, right? Not layers, the 7 powers. And that's very mystical and very deep and very hard to understand and requires its own kind of scholarship. And not all of them are in there. Some of them were lost, to decay. They didn't get them. But the point is that she gets mystical, and they're like, well, that he felt, or the people that he felt were not able to take that kind of high-level intellectual or mystical teachings. He didn't. And she was one of the ones he could. I mean, that's the real bombshell, is that she could take it and do all of that, and he could give that to her, but not Peter, or most of the other apostles that we know as the apostles. That's pretty astounding.
They're insulted.
Yes.
I want to say one other thing. I don't know how many people have noticed it, but right there on the back of the church, there's a picture frame with the apostolic succession in it. Now, Ray, please correct me. As I remember, as a Catholic schoolgirl, the apostolic succession was supposed to come directly from Peter, who in turn would give it to the next one, so that those people were empowered to ordain others. Is that what it was? It was about ordination. Okay.
That's in the power of the keys.
And well, Rusty has made this point so many times, that the early church did not have a single doctrine. And what we're saying here at St. John's is that, similar to the early church having no particular Christian doctrine, let us not pretend that 2,000 years later there is a single Christian doctrine. That maybe this Christian doctrine is the one that you have in your heart that's between you and God. Maybe that's the Christian doctrine that matters, and not the one that the party line is towing, or that I'm towing, or that Rusty is towing. But what our function may be is to encourage you to love the path you're on, and to say it doesn't have to agree with anything. It's just between you and God, and we're very happy to encourage that relationship in a community where it's safe to have an individual relationship with God that doesn't agree with anybody else's. So that's basically what we do here, I think, or which we're ascribing to do, but with also respect to where we've come from. This is not about disrespecting apostolic succession either. It's simply saying that there may be a trump card that makes the apostolic succession people nervous. And that trump card, I get a chance to say every year in July, because Rusty takes his vacation, and it happens to be Mary Magdalene. So every year I get to say that trump card is Mary Magdalene. And I like bringing out the wild card and the trump card and reminding us that things may not be as we see them. And I think we need it. I think we need compassion. Every time I read a story, Mary Magdalene cried when they accused her. It says in here, she cried when they accused her of making it up. But I think that's just wonderful that she did, because what do you think I made this up? I just shared my heart. I've just poured my heart and soul, which is a very divine feminine thing to do, right? Somebody asks you a question, you answer them from the heart. she answers them from the heart, tells them the mystical teachings, and then they say, I don't think so. I don't think that's right. And they have a right to question her, but it says here what they basically thought she was making it up. And that, I think, is a real telling. And there is this also belief that the Peter, it was Jesus' brother James had a sort of a Christian sect that he was interested in. There were the early Gnostics. There were a bunch of them. And Peter and Paul sort of managed to win. They sort of beat everybody out and sort of won, and they sort of became the party, the winning party, which I think you need if you're going to try to organize someone's life that had this kind of an impact on the world. You try. See how you come up with, I don't know that I would have done even anywhere near as well as what they did. But what they failed to realize is that it's the individual's relationship. And in God's eyes, we're all equal. How did we get to this? Well, the belief is they interpreted it through their own culture and their own ignorance, and said, no, we'll set it up so that we'll sort of oust Mary Magdalene, oust James, oust anybody who doesn't do what we say, because we have to carry it forward. Somebody's got to carry this forward and get it right, and we'll get it as right as... I don't believe that Paul thought he got it right, by the way. I think he thought he got it as right as he could. I think that he was doing the very best. He had an enormous amount of energy and did an enormous amount. So I don't count him as one of the people who sort of screwed up Christ's message. I want to make that clear. That's not what this is either. It's simply saying there were other people equal who didn't get recognized over the centuries for whatever reason, and Mary Magdalene is certainly one of them.
You spoke about sort of traditions and what Paul said, that women should wear something on their head when they speak, which is a very Jewish tradition that for example, that a woman wears something equal to a yarmulke on her head. And then you explain later that you said was an insert, was that if she had any questions she should ask her husband, which is also a Jewish trait. And so you said there were really no precedents, but they seem to have acquired a lot of customs from the Jewish religion. Yet later in life, 2,000 years forward, okay, most people went to churches put nothing on their head, except if you're a bishop or the Pope. You wear actually yarmulke, or you have different types of hats that you wear. So it's interesting how they saved some, but got rid of it for the majority, male or female.
Well, these are our human traditions, and we're all going to speak from the culture we know.
Well, that's what I'm saying, that their only culture they knew was Judaism.
That's actually not true, because there were three cultures going on there that I know of, the Greek and the Roman, as well as, and Judaism was the smallest of the cultures in Jerusalem at the time.
But he's making a very important point. Jesus was born a Jew. Jesus lived his life as a Jew. Jesus died a Jew. He had no intention to break away from Judaism or turn away from it. So the fact that there are many Jewish traditions that are sitting in there, and in the Gospels, and in the writings of Paul and other New Testament writers, testify to that, very much so. Paul becomes the epistle to the Gentiles. He and Barnabas are the main ones that go off and say, okay, we're going to say that the law does not necessarily apply to people coming in from paganism. You do not have to be circumcised first, become a Jew, and then become a Christian. Whereas the group under James, under what we call the pillars, Peter, James, John, from Jerusalem, these were the people who were saying, well, first you have to become a Jew, and then you become a follower of Jesus. So all of those things underlie the whole thing. And Paul himself keeps saying, I am a Jew, I am a Pharisee, etc. He goes on to that. Not all that sure that he was a Pharisee. He has some training as a Pharisee, but I doubt that he was a Pharisee proper. The authority I can refer to for that is a Jewish one. Chaim Maccabee, in his book, The Mythmaker, discusses exactly Paul's background. Good point, something that should always be remembered.
Definitely. Yes.
And in the Catholic Church, we did wear hats. I don't know whether they've done away with it. We did wear either a hat or a veil, at least up through the 50s and the 60s. I don't know whether it's still a requirement, but certainly
No,
if you
Joe.
went into St. Peter's, you know, for any men's day, they had those black lace things that you put over your head. Has it changed?
It's changed in the sense that if you have an ultra-conservative church, such if you ever watch EWTN, Eternal Word Television Network, you'll see that in their masses they always have the women with something on their heads, a veil. A few of them know, but in general there's no rule anymore that you must wear something on your head within the Roman Catholic Church. That's after Vatican II. You're also correct that the Pope and the Cardinals wear what looks like a yarmulke. They just give it a different name. It's called a calip, a French term. So, but it's the same thing. It's to cover the tonsure, basically, the bald spot.
Maybe I should wear one.
Wear it, can you?
I think I'll come in with one next week. Maybe you'll think I have hair. Or I will.
I was bothered reading this by the idea, this is a knee-jerk reaction, bothered by the idea that Jesus would have favorites at all. But the more I think about it, having been with Saima yesterday, the human being has favorites, and the human being recognizes people, as you were saying, that can learn what you have to teach at a different level. And I've seen her work very closely with individuals who become close to her in a way that I haven't, and she knows who I am, but that, you know, just the 500 people in the room are not. And it's just a very interesting thought, because on the level of human personality, we have preferences. On the level of divinity, we are all one and all equal, and are loved equally and can love equally. But I think that ascription to Jesus of being divinely perfect came later. And he was so wise, and as a human being, and such a phenomenal teacher and an enlightened being, that it didn't matter, in a way, that he had favorites. It was the ones who weren't enlightened who had the problem with him having favorites.
Also, if you have something to say to someone and you know they're not capable of understanding what you're going to say, why would you say it? But you would say it. If you have something to pass on and you know that someone can hear it, then you might say. And I personally think, and stop the roll the presses, but from the biblical scholarship I've done in the last year, and I've done a fair amount to be able to speak intelligently about this, I'm pretty convinced that they were married. I mean, they're in so many spiritual and so many ways they're equals, and there is so much precedent for it. Culturally, he would just not be given the same respect if he was not married as he was if he was, and it would explain her being able to get into the houses when, it just makes so much sense if you really read it from that perspective, all the stuff that went on. I wasn't there, I don't know, but it's from what I see, it's very, very clear that they were probably married. To me, they were, and that it was just filtered out over time because the Messiah needed to be, made into somebody a little bit beyond human. So having a wife and kids or something may not have made him look like the Messiah as much. I don't know, but it's pretty clear.
Ray, with the Coptic Bible, what was left in? Because this seems like this was lost even to the Coptics, or wasn't?
This is most of what is sitting in the sheets that you have today. This is from the Berlin Codex, which is the main one. That's got most of the Greek. Now they have Coptic fragments, and I'm not sure where they're from. I'm not sure they were found at Dog and Muddy. But there are a bunch of Coptic fragments. And for example, the term Son of Man appears both in Greek, in the Berlin Codex, and it appears as Son of Man in Coptic, which is a different set of words, but nonetheless saying the same thing. So the Coptic is very fragmentary. If you look at the reconstructions, you look for brackets. There are brackets all over the Coptic, meaning the Coptic is being reconstructed by looking at the Greek. So it's basically, in this particular case, that we have a lot of Greek. With Thomas, the Gospel of Thomas, we have a complete Gospel of Thomas in Coptic. We have only a couple of fragments. Matter of fact, one of the fragments shows up in a hymn by Wesley. It was a small thing, it's about the size of a credit card. That's about all we have about fragments of Thomas in Greek. But we do have the whole thing in Coptic. So here the Coptic is very minor because it's really hard, it's reconstructed on the basis of what they see in the Greek manuscripts. And we're missing about 14 pages. It's a lot of material missing.
So only the Gospel of Thomas is in, the only extra thing for the Coptics is the Gospel of Thomas, or are there others?
Yeah, well, all of the stuff in Nag Hammadi is Coptic. All those codices, remember these are not scrolls. They're not unloaded. These are codices, book type things. They are all in Coptic. Gospel of Philip is in Coptic. Gospel of Truth is in Coptic. All of the Gnostic writings are in Coptic. We do have some Greek with Mary, for example, Gospel of Mary. That's why we know that goes back way back to the middle of the 2nd century.
Okay, so it's a different language.
For Thomas, everything's in Coptic.
Does material survive better in book form or in scroll form the whole time?
It survives much better in that form because you have to keep unrolling the scroll. Paper tends to fall apart. And you sew these things together, and it's very, very hard to put them apart, restore them, and so on. The codex hangs together much better, especially in Egypt, where it's very dry. Okay? If you had this in Iraq, it would be in much worse shape.
And there's a good chance that a lot of missing materials are still found.
There's probably a
Iraq
whole slew of
and,
stuff. There's a lot of stuff that you get hints on, you say, well, who's this guy? And he shows up here. For example, Andrew, there's a big Acts of Andrew that show up later. That's about the 4th century, the Acts of Andrew. And Andrew becomes very important because he is a symbol for Anglicanism of something opposed to Peter. Because what happens, Peter becomes the Bishop of Rome, if you will, western side, and the name of Andrew is associated with the Byzantines. And the Byzantine church becomes the Greek Orthodox, the Orthodox churches. And these take the name from Andrew. So these also never made the mistake of making Mary Magdalene into a prostitute. They never accepted that. That was part of the Western tradition. People who wanted to denigrate her leadership role in the church at the time, in the emerging church at the time. So there's a lot of, we're probably missing an awful lot of stuff. A lot of it because the Orthodox people went out of their way to destroy as much as they could have, unfortunately. Some of the things that escaped, like in those jars, happenstance and good luck. We would never know anything about those Gnostics from their own voice if it weren't for Nag Hammadi.
I had one question for you. Your scarf that you're wearing, there's some significance compared to Mary for this?
No, I just like it.
I thought the symbols meant something because there's only one set of symbols that are more relevant.
Absolutely no intellect involved in the selection. It was red. By the way, there's a great story about Mary Magdalene that I haven't found, that I've asked around and nobody knew. They don't know if this story is true, but I think it's worth saying, and it's about the Easter egg in the tradition, where this is after everything happened. I don't have my notes with me. Tiberius, right? Tiberius, and she had told Tiberius, he had asked her about the resurrection, and she told him what she experienced, and he said he was holding an egg, and he said, "Oh, I don't believe that resurrection story any more than I believe this egg could turn red." And the minute he said it, the egg turned red. And that was how the beginning of the tradition of dyeing eggs actually came from that story. That's one of the stories. I thought that was, so you'll see pictures of Byzantine medieval Mary Magdalene often with an egg, a white or a red egg. And it's from that story. So if you ever see those pictures, you'll secretly know something. Not even Rusty knew that. I finally found something you didn't know. Once a year I get it. I think that there's one other thing. Do we have a second to talk about the Son of Man thing? There's one other thing I just wanted to share with you that Ray pointed out to me. I thought it was an extraordinary point. If you wouldn't mind, Ray,
Well,
would you talk
the
about it?
expression that's used here is the kingdom of the Son of Man. If you compare Mary Magdalene's gospel with, say, Luke or something like that, you find the expression in Luke, don't look over there, don't look over there. The kingdom of God is among you, or is within you. You can translate that either way. It could be inside of you personally, or it could be spread out among the people. And that was kingdom of God. That's the word that he uses. In Mary Magdalene's gospel, you find, instead of the kingdom of the Son of Man. Now, this is a Greek expression, and literally the Greek says, the Son of the Man. Two definite articles, sort of awkward expression. But this is the way in which the philosophers write. When they want to, for example, when Plato wants to talk about the idea of humanity, rather than man, this man, humankind, he would put a the in front of the Greek word for man, which is anthropos, to anthropo, the man. It means humanity. So the Son of Man means the Son of perfect humanity. He's not manifesting ordinary individuals, but the perfect ideal that actually Plato thought existed out there. Aristotle said it's a good idea, but it doesn't exist out there. It's only in the instances, individual men. So the Son of Man meant in that case the Son of perfect humanity. Karen King, who translated the Gospel of Mary, she's a professor at Harvard Divinity School. She translates it as the child. I like child better because instead of son, it takes away the patriarchal aspects of the thing, and it does one thing more that son does not. It gives the idea that there would be a growth and improvement. So the child of the true humanity is what Mary, the Gospel of Mary, is referring to. And that, the Savior says, is within you. And it's on that basis that then you go out and preach. On that basis only. Unless you recognize that the child of the true humanity dwells within you, then you're not going to get anywhere. That underscores what you pointed out at the beginning, that the spiritual aspect is what entitles you to leadership. That this is within you, and you have recognized it within you, and it will grow within you as the child grows to become an adult.
Yes. And I think why I think that's important for us is, I don't know about any of you, but in my reading of the Bible, I always come to the Son of Man, and this sort of question mark comes across, and I'm like, what does that really mean? And with Ray's explanation, I now think I have a better understanding that it's referring to Jesus as the perfect example of the child of humanity that lies within all of us. And what a difficult concept that is to read every time I see the word Son of Man. But so you can see why they probably somehow shortened it. But I think that we have, this is the kind of things I love to wrestle with. And I think that all of us, or many of us here at St. John's, like to wrestle with this. What does something like that you read for your whole life really mean? I mean, why did they really put it there? And so man was not meant, the word is the man, which means humanity. So even from the time it was ever first written, or when Jesus actually said it, he was, according to what the evidence we have, referring to humanity in general, not to a man or the male species or whatever it's been meant to mean over the hundreds and hundreds of years since his death and resurrection. So I think it's a very important thing, and I've had to hear Ray say it about 6 times to really get to that. When the next time I read it, I think I'll have a better understanding of what that word is trying to say. Any other questions? Yes, John.
Next week, maybe, you can tell us about the fact that possibly Mary Magdalene and Jesus were married and had children. Not today, but we're running out of time. But it'd be great to hear you expound.
Okay. Well, that's a very interesting theory. And well, next week is actually, the gospel is the Our Father. It's the prayer of Jesus. And I'm really terribly excited that we get to have a discussion of the Our Father next week. I count myself among the luckiest of men to get a chance to stand up in a community and discuss that prayer that has changed and guided the world for 2,000 years. I mean, that's the prayer that has done it, and we get to talk about it next week. So I think we might get into it. We might be able to back into Mary Magdalene a little bit next week,
Or another week.
or in another week where we talk about the divine
So
Trinity. Yes, and it is. I think that like everything I would like to share with you when I come here and I'm asked to do this is that these are extraordinary human beings who lived in an extraordinary time that changed the very face of the world. They were alive when something happened that changed the world forever. Jesus reframed everything. Last week, it was so clear to me. He reframed the word neighbor. Neighbor didn't mean after he lived. Neighbor meant something else than it ever meant before in humanity. Christianity does that all the time. It takes a word or a concept, and I think that's what's so gorgeous about this religion, is it takes a word or concept and reframes it so that a new paradigm is created. You can't use the word neighbor as a Christian the way you would use it in another context. You just can't anymore because of the Good Samaritan story. It doesn't exist that way. And last week we were talking about the bleeding heart thing. I was saying that, and I'm proud to be a bleeding heart. Believe me, I'm not ashamed. But so many people shared with me at Coffee Hour ways to deal with that, and I was so very grateful for that. The idea of, and I can't tell you. I think that's what Jesus did, and probably all those people who lived there. They got us, I think, thinking about the world of people as our brothers and sisters. And it's not death that upsets me. It's needless death. It's not war that upsets me. It's unjust. It's when there's another way. You don't have to go that way, and you go that way anyway. That's what upsets me. And I would say that that's what upsets all of us. That is not just me, and that's where my bleeding heart comes, because I see a human life as something that if it can be spared and not taken in a direction, that we have a duty as human beings to not let that life perish, to not let it be wasted. And it breaks my heart that every day something goes by that could have been prevented that no one prevented. Not me, too. I didn't prevent it either. And I don't know, sometimes I feel completely powerless to do it. But in Coffee Hour last week, so many people came and made suggestions and talked about the way that they cope with that idea of the taking on the well-being of all of humanity. And I just think it's an extraordinary thing. And we do it very well at St. John's. Like I said last week, I think we're a good neighbor. I think that we use the word neighbor very well, and I'm very proud of that. I think we can end it for today. Thank you all.